After leaving the riverbank, Linn and Lukas are pursued by a one-armed giant. Lukas's body is crushed by a collapsed archway, and Linn has no choice but to put him out of his misery. That'll teach you for kidnapping me, you bastard. Linn hears the voice of Ragnar, who tells her she needs to go towards the light, to the mine over the lake. In order to do so, she must find Freya's harp, and by playing a song to tell the Guardians to send a boat across the lake. After Linn obtains the harp, she is pursued by Skogsgrua, who bites her, giving her the curse. Whilst crossing the lake, Linn encounters the Näcken playing his violin.
Aj, aj, aj. Stackars lilla flicka.
He says he can relieve her of the curse in exchange for the harp. She isn't in control of the boat, so she continues on to the mines, with the Näcken laughing hysterically. Ghasts are ghosts or the living dead in Scandinavian folklore. They are the spirit of sinners, as full of hatred as one can be, such that even their name is despised and feared after their death. They return to terrorize the living as Ghast. Usually they remain invisible, but can transform into a visible state once they have lost all remnants of their humanity, and return as something more grotesque and monstrous than the sinners they once were. In Unforgiving, you'll meet these nasty creatures in the mines, emerging from portal-like windows. It's left up to the player to decide who they were and where they come from. It thirsts for your soul, devouring whole, lusting for pain for the past. You'll know its face well, but only time will tell if tonight might just be your last. Unforgiving's trolls are inspired by small Swedish trolls. The poor creatures in Unforgiven are locked up in the mines, and through darkness and incest, they are transformed into nightmares. Nightmares waiting in the dark, which feed on whatever and whoever wanders into their lair. Swedish trolls are hairy, gross, and ugly in appearance, yet still have some resemblance to humans. It's worth recognizing that a troll may come in varying shapes and sizes. Some even have 9 heads. They build, hunt, and sometimes even wear clothes. The biggest difference between trolls and humans are their size, ears, tails, and fingernails. Trolls have pointy, hairy ears, very similar to the ears of a lynx. Trolls fear sunlight, because if it touches them, their bodies will turn into stone. The Näcken left the hall fuming, now determined on undoing Freya's work. He would infuse the harp with his own magic, and use it so that she would watch all that she had created turn to dust and ashes. One night they broke into the Hall of the Gods. They made their way to the Hall of the Harp, to the sacred shrine upon which the instrument rested. But the gods were prepared, and they had set a trap. Just as the god was to pluck the harp, Freya and Odin appeared. They had seen through the creature's illusions at the banquet, but they had done nothing fearing for the safety of the other creatures gathered. Odin burned away the magic the god had cast upon himself, and revealed his true, pitiful appearance. Freya, now enraged, breathed fire into her palms and blinded the god, so that he would never look upon her or her harp again. As punishment for aiding the god, she burned the hands of the spirit of the rock and tree, so they would never be able to touch the harp or bring it to their master. As his eyes burned in his skull, the god flew forward to grab the harp. Odin, acting with wisdom, saw there was no time to stop the god from claiming the harp, and did the only thing he could think to do. The harp, the shrine, the cursed being, and the despicable creatures were transported to another land, a land without magic, where they would be less powerful than in the land of the gods. He sent them to Midgard, the land next to the gods on the root of the great ash tree, Yggdrasil. They lost much of their power, and they could only use a fraction of their magic in this foreign world. The creatures washed up deep beneath the earth, in a labyrinth that contained the door to the gods, now locked to them forever, the magic that once infused the door, now gone. They scrambled their way out of the mountain, and emerged in a forested land in the realm of Midgard. To quench his burning flesh, the god crawled into a stream. He stayed there until the agony he felt was bearable. The harp and the shrine emerged in a nearby village. The shaman of the village, a wise woman who had read of the gods and their dealings, found the instrument and knew it for what it was. She swore an oath to the gods that they would never end up in the wrong hands. The harp was locked away, its power hidden from the world. Vowing to protect the harp with their lives, the good folk of the village isolated themselves from the rest of the world and were forgotten. They were the first guardians of the harp. As centuries passed, the knowledge of the harp faded until only a precious few knew the truth. Only a trusted few knew of the power that lay within their midst. Over the years, the villagers began travelling outside the village with horse and carriage to sell their wares and buy necessities. A gold vein was discovered in the mountains, and the villagers began to mine rock and use the gold for trade. As the picks and axes dug into the stone, the rock spirit awoke. He felt assaulted and violated as men picked and hacked at his very flesh. A blind rage came over him, and he crushed and slaughtered the miners. To keep the villagers safe from the knowledge of the monsters, the guardians blamed the deaths on a mining accident. The Näcken prevented the rock spirit from harming more villagers. He knew that he could not find the harp by himself. Over time, the mine was abandoned. Years, decades, and centuries passed. There was a young son of the shaman who craved the influence and might of his father. The shaman recognized this in his son. For this reason, he was never told of the harp's magic or the secret duty of the guardians. The young man felt scorned and rejected by his father. One night, he stormed out of their home and set out into the night. The Näcken, who'd been biding his time for centuries now, saw an opportunity. He appeared before the young man and spoke to him with his honeyed tongue. He promised the boy knowledge of runes and magic should he bring him the harp that was kept in the village, so he could once more play his sweet music. The son, unaware of the harp's power, agreed and set out to steal the harp. On that fateful night, the son gave up the harp to the Näcken. The creature, now possessing the harp, went down into the mountains to clear the maze of stone that led to the dead door back to his own realm. Drunk with the power that the creature bestowed upon the young man, he returned home where his father was waiting. The shaman told his son the truth about the harp and that he had forsaken the world of the gods. Men set out that night to return the harp to its sacred shrine. They failed, their bodies broken by the rock spirit or cursed into abominations by the tree spirit. The son began to feel cursed magic flow through his veins. He knew a way he could stop the cursed creatures. The young man found the god, and strengthened by the spell cast upon him, he managed to pry the harp from the creature. The remaining villagers managed to restrain the Näcken long enough for the young man to put the harp back in its holy resting place. The harp was once more hidden from the ancient, wretched Näcken, who could no longer sense or find it. The son returned to the labyrinth in the mountains. He was now cursed, in a state of living dead, and wanted to be with his people for eternity. And so the knowledge of the harp and its powers was lost to man. It hides in a forgotten village, in the middle of a deep, dark forest in the frozen north, only remembered by the living dead, and craved by a wretched being who would use it to destroy us all. In my last video we encountered Näcken, and I discussed their various forms. Näcken are one of the most recognised creatures in Scandinavian folklore. In Unforgiving, the Näcken was created to match the stories developers heard when they were children. A naked man playing beautiful music on his violin that would lure you into the water and drown you. Näcken is bound to water and is often found around dusk or night, playing his violin. If sitting by water, water lilies will bloom to reveal his presence. The Swedish name for water lilies is taken directly from this being and are known as Nyx roses. The lilies are his garden, so stealing them angers him, and he will pull whoever does into the depths. If you show no fear towards the Näcken and bring him an offering, often a black cat or other black animal, he will appear and tune your fiddle so it will play as beautifully as his own. There is a poem in the game that mentions the Näcken. Melodies of old, your blood will run cold, yet the song is alluring and sweet. Silent screams as you drown, as he pulls you deep down, the fathomless depths full of deceit.
Lukas went back to school and got his degree when he was 23. He kept on working at the factory, saving money for himself this time. Linn was still alone, her mother was always at school, Lukas was always gone. On top of that, it was all about her stepsister, Malin. Linn felt like she was invisible. She started going to parties with her friends and started drinking. There were boys there who glanced her way and she felt noticed. The more she drank, the braver she got, and then even the girls thought she was cool. Linn felt, during those parties, more alone than ever, but at least she didn't feel invisible. Linn would come home drunk regularly, trying to hide the slurring, spraying perfume on herself so that Carl and her mother wouldn't smell the alcohol on her breath. Katarina and Carl caught on to what Linn was doing in her spare time. They were furious. Carl especially, telling Linn that she was creating a bad environment for her little sister. This hurt Linn, that they were more worried about how her behaviour would affect Malin than the behaviour itself. Linn barely graduated high school at 19. Her teacher encouraged her to try to pursue her interest in music. She left home as soon as she could and started working at a local restaurant, renting a one-bedroom apartment in the city. Lukas tried to keep the family together, but Carl did not want Linn around Malin, so Linn rarely got to see her mother. As a last-ditch effort for the family to make peace, Lukas arranged for him and Linn to be summer camp leaders for the first year that Malin would go. Lukas was thriving at camp, as usual, but Linn was having a difficult time. She was easily irritated and annoyed. It had been a while since she'd gone this long without a drink. One night she overheard some noise and found some kids, including Malin, playing with knives. She told them off, telling them how dangerous it was to play with knives, and asking them to hand the knives over. They all obliged, except for Malin, who was annoyed at her half-sister. She refused to let Linn take the knife from her. Linn struggled to get the knife back, not wanting her half-sister, despite everything, to get hurt. She tried tugging at it, but Malin kept her grip on the handle and started telling Linn how her dad hated her and that her sister was a drunk. Linn tried everything to pry the knife out of Malin's hands, worried that Malin would hurt herself. Lukas had run over to the scene. Startled by his arrival, the knife had slipped from Linn's hands and cut Malin. It sliced across the side of her throat. Malin had dropped the knife and then had fallen to the ground. Around her, the world turned into a blur. Cars appeared with red and blue lights, and some men took Malin away. Malin died from blood loss on the way to the hospital. Katarina and Carl never spoke to Linn again. Lukas tried to explain what had happened, but their mother and Carl refused to listen to any explanation of what had happened that night. Linn blamed herself for Malin's death. She started drinking more than ever. She also started taking drugs to cope with the guilt and shame of that night. A few months after the accident, Linn called Lukas, panicked. She told him that she had gotten into trouble with some drug dealers. They were threatening to hurt her if she couldn't come up with the money she owed. The call came in at 4:30 in the morning, the day Lukas was supposed to take a test to get into university. He did not attend the test. He rushed over to an ATM, withdrew a considerable chunk of the money he had saved, and went to his sister's apartment. The dealers got the money and he stayed with his sister. He tended to her black eye and made her a cup of cocoa. A few months later, Linn lost her job at the restaurant. She started getting help from welfare and Lukas would help her out with money here and there. Linn was teetering on the edge of drug addiction. One night, Linn called Lukas and told him she thought she took too much and was dying. Lukas managed to get her to hospital and Linn was okay. However, he now knew that he couldn't ignore his sister's behaviour anymore. He had tried to be nice, but Lukas now knew that he had to do something to try to take control of the situation. Something had to be done, and that is where our story begins.
Strandvaskare translates roughly to drowning ghosts. They are creatures found near the sea or large lakes. They are a person who drowned, but their bodies were never recovered. At night, the drowning ghosts could be heard howling in the wind. Their body was lost, and the agony of not having a proper Christian burial was what turned these people into drowning ghosts. If you walked down to the shore at night, they could rise from their graves, jump on your back, and wouldn't let go until you buried them in sacred ground. It's the first monster we see in the game. There is a book we find in the mines. It says there exists an underworld, a purgatory, a place where humans have to contemplate their prior choices and atone for their sins. This gives us a big hint as to where the story might be going. We come across another book deeper in the mine. It says that in purgatory, people had to suffer their own worst nightmare, over and over again, until the Norns were satisfied. This foreshadows the conclusion of our protagonist Linn's grim fate. Linn finds herself on a platform in the realm of the dead. She's surrounded by relics of her addiction, with a voice telling her to jump. She jumps and lands in a nightmare-like space, which is the Näcken's domain.
Du lyckades ta dig ända hit, till mig. Och nu kan jag äntligen besitta den gyllene till mig. Sådär.
Linn hands the Näcken the harp, and he removes her curse.
Just så. Fina flicka. Sparka din stackars broder, som du aldrig trodde att du skulle få se igen.
Linn is trapped in purgatory, forever reliving the events of the game. The choices we make can our very souls break, to be judged by the dead and the living. The twists and turns of life, like cuts from a sharpened knife, relentless and endlessly unforgiving. Keep an eye out for a future video about another game from the same developer. It might be the third in my accidental trilogy of Norse mythology and Scandinavian folklore games, so maybe consider subscribing if you want to catch that one. As usual, I have a link to the Steam page for the game down in the description, and it's often on sale if you want to check it out. Thank you for watching.